These numbers tell the story of how an entire American city can vanish in plain sight. Back in 1960, Gary, Indiana housed 178,000 residents and was home to the world's largest steel mill. Today, it is down to 67,000 people, over 10,000 abandoned buildings, and a budget deficit that would make a small nation nervous. This is what happens when a company town loses its company and discovers that everything else was built on quicksand. Gary wasn't supposed to fail. It was engineered for success by some of the most powerful men in America. In 1906, United States Steel Corporation, co-founded by J.P. Morgan and chaired by lawyer Elbert Henry Gary, needed a new location for what would become the largest steel mill on the continent. They found it in the swamplands of northwest Indiana, right on the shores of Lake Michigan, in what is now known as the Calumet region. The location was perfect. Lake Michigan provided access to iron ore from Minnesota's Iron Range, coal could be shipped in from Pennsylvania and West Virginia, and the site had everything except people, which was exactly what U.S. Steel wanted. They could build their ideal industrial city from scratch. After secretly purchasing almost 10,000 acres of swampland, U.S. Steel immediately began construction of the Gary Works. The scale was breathtaking. This wasn't just a factory, it was an entire industrial ecosystem designed to turn raw materials into the steel that would build America's skyscrapers, bridges, and railroads. The growth was explosive. On June 1st, 1906, Gary's population was 334 people. By January 1907, it had jumped to 5,550. By 1908, over 10,000 people called Gary home. Word had spread that this new city offered something precious in industrial America: steady, well-paying work. Workers came from everywhere during what historians call the Great Migration of the early 20th century. The 1920 census shows that nearly 30% of Gary's population was foreign-born, mostly from Eastern European countries, with another 31% being first-generation Americans. These were not just laborers, they were skilled craftsmen, engineers, and entrepreneurs who saw opportunity in this brand new city. By 1930, Gary's population exceeded 100,000, and the city had developed its own culture and identity. Broadway became a commercial center for the entire region. Department stores, movie theaters, and restaurants lined the streets. The crown jewel was City Methodist Church, completed in 1926 at a cost of over $800,000, equivalent to $14 million today. At its peak, City Methodist served over 3,000 congregants, proving Gary's prosperity and community spirit. For decades, this formula worked brilliantly. The Gary Works employed over 30,000 people in the early 1970s, making it not just Gary's largest employer, but one of the largest industrial employers in America. Steelwork paid well enough for families to buy homes, send their children to college, and build the kind of middle-class life that defined the American dream. But then, the mathematics of global economics began to shift, and Gary's entire foundation started to crumble. The first cracks appeared in 1971, when thousands of factory employees were laid off. Union Director Andrew White captured the shock. He said, "We had expected some layoffs, but now it seems like this thing is going to be a lot rougher than we had expected." Frankly, we had not foreseen anything like this. What Gary had not foreseen was that the very success of American steel had made it a target for international competition. Foreign steel, produced in newer facilities with lower labor costs, began flooding American markets. At the same time, the American economy was shifting away from heavy manufacturing towards services and technology. The numbers tell the brutal story. Gary Works employment fell from over 30,000 in the early 1970s to 6,000 by 1990, then to 5,100 by 2015, and just 2,500 by 2021. Today, only 2,246 people work at what was once the world's largest steel mill. But the job losses were only the beginning. Gary's population began hemorrhaging as residents fled for opportunities elsewhere. The peak population of 178,000 in 1960 fell to 175,000 in 1970, then to 102,746 by 2000. The 2010 census recorded 80,294 residents. By 2020, Gary was home to just 69,093 people. Today's population of 67,199 represents a 62% decline from the city's peak. This wasn't just demographic change, it was demographic catastrophe. White residents left first and fastest. The white population plummeted from 108,980 in 1960 to just 18,995 by 1990, an 83% decline. During the same period, the proportion of white residents fell from 61% to 16.3%, while the African American population rose from 38.7% to over 80%. This transformation was partly driven by the election of Richard Hatcher as mayor in 1967. Along with Carl Stokes in Cleveland, Hatcher became one of the first African Americans elected mayor of a major U.S. city. His victory represented a breakthrough in American politics, inspiring a generation of black political leaders. As historian Jacoby Williams put it, "There is no Barack Obama if there is no Richard Hatcher, period." But Hatcher's election also accelerated white flight from Gary. Many white residents, uncomfortable with black political leadership, moved to neighboring communities. This created a devastating feedback loop, as the tax base eroded and city services declined, making the city less attractive to remaining residents and businesses. The situation got worse through a political maneuver that stripped Gary of its ability to grow. State legislators eliminated Gary's 3-mile buffer zone, allowing the town of Merrillville to expand right to Gary's border. Richard Hatcher recalled that a couple of legislators from up here, a fellow by the name of Chet Dobus, who is still in office, pushed a bill through that took away the city of Gary's buffer zone. With the buffer zone gone, Merrillville could cater to commercial interests, entertainment, tourists, and consumers, while Gary was left landlocked, unable to annex new territory or attract suburban development. Longtime resident Please Yates captured the dynamic perfectly, saying that when people start making money, they move out. By 1987, when Hatcher left office after 20 years, about 50,000 people had fled Gary. The city he inherited with a 15% poverty rate now had a 25% poverty rate, and unemployment exceeded 20%. Critics blamed Hatcher for the decline, but this ignored a fundamental reality. The steel industry was collapsing nationwide, turning the entire Rust Belt into a landscape of abandoned factories and shrinking cities. Northwest Indiana lost 42.5% of its manufacturing jobs between 1979 and 1986. The National Tube Division closed, followed by the Gary Screw and Bolt Company. This wasn't about local politics, it was about global economic forces beyond any mayor's control. Cities like Detroit, Michigan, and Youngstown, Ohio, were experiencing similar devastation, while Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, managed to successfully reinvent itself through diversification into technology and healthcare. The human cost was staggering. As legitimate employment disappeared, illegitimate opportunities filled the void. By 1994, Gary had earned the ignominious title of Murder Capital of the United States, with 91 murders per 100,000 residents. In 1995, the city recorded 129 murders, alongside over 3,000 reported crimes. The physical decay matched the social breakdown. Buildings that once housed thriving businesses stood empty. City Methodist Church, that symbol of Gary's former prosperity, closed in 1975 as attendance dwindled and funds dried up. In 1997, a major fire devastated large sections of downtown, including the already abandoned church. Today, Gary resembles a post-apocalyptic landscape. There are approximately 10,000 abandoned buildings throughout the city. A 2015 survey found that about 13,000 properties, over a third of all structures, were considered blighted. 20% of buildings are abandoned, with an additional 37% classified as blighted. The tax implications are catastrophic. Property taxes provide approximately 80% of Gary's general fund operating revenue. When properties are abandoned or lose value, the entire municipal budget collapses. The city collects only about 42% of what it is owed in property taxes, far below the Lake County average. Indiana's 2008 property tax reforms made things worse. The state imposed caps on property tax rates and changed assessment methods, particularly affecting industrial properties. Gary lost $40 million from its budget as a result. The tax caps were projected to reduce Gary's property tax revenues by approximately half. Today, Gary faces a projected $15 million deficit on its $60 million budget. Without revenue from 2 riverboat casinos on the city's edge, Gary's budget would be just $37 million, barely enough to maintain basic services for a city that once housed nearly 180,000 people. The poverty statistics are heartbreaking. Gary's median household income stands at just $31,936. Over 32% of residents live below the poverty line. This is not just about numbers, it is about families struggling to survive in a city where opportunity has largely vanished. But Gary's story isn't just about industrial decline, it's about the broader transformation of American cities and the hollowing out of the industrial Midwest. The forces that destroyed Gary, including globalization, technological change, demographic shifts, and political fragmentation, affected cities throughout the region. What makes Gary unique is how completely it depended on a single industry and a single employer. Unlike diversified cities that could weather the loss of manufacturing jobs, Gary was essentially a company town. When U.S. Steel's fortunes declined, Gary had no fallback plan. The irony is that Gary was actually a victim of American success. The steel that built America's cities, bridges, and infrastructure came largely from Gary. The prosperity that allowed Americans to move to suburbs and pursue service economy jobs was built on Gary's industrial foundation. But when America moved beyond heavy manufacturing, Gary was left behind. This abandonment had profound cultural implications. Gary produced one of America's most beloved cultural exports, the Jackson family. Michael Jackson was born at 2300 Jackson Street in 1958, one of 11 children living in a tiny 672-square-foot house that Michael once described as no bigger than a garage. Joe Jackson, Michael's father, embodied the Gary dream. He moved to the city at age 18, working as a welder and crane operator at U.S. Steel while pursuing his musical ambitions. The Jackson Five's early success represented everything Gary hoped to be: talent, ambition, and hard work, leading to unprecedented achievement. But even the Jacksons couldn't stay. In 1969, as Gary was beginning its long decline, the family relocated to Los Angeles to sign with Motown Records, leaving their hometown behind in pursuit of their musical dreams. Michael Jackson's story became a metaphor for Gary itself: incredible talent born from industrial grit, but ultimately needing to leave home to find success. Today, Chuck Hughes of the Gary Chamber of Commerce acknowledges this painful reality. He says, "Let's face it, when this city touts itself on famous people or what Gary, Indiana is, it's always Michael Jackson to start the conversation." Gary's greatest achievement was producing someone who had to leave. The abandoned buildings that dot Gary's landscape have become a kind of tourist attraction, drawing urban explorers and photographers fascinated by industrial decay. Films like the remake of A Nightmare on Elm Street, Pearl Harbor, and Transformers: Dark of the Moon have used Gary as a backdrop for apocalyptic scenes. The city has become a symbol of American decline, its ruins serving as a warning about what can happen when economic foundations crumble. But there are signs of hope emerging from the devastation. Current Mayor Eddie Melton insists, "Gary is a resilient city, and we are writing our comeback story." Recent developments suggest this is not just political rhetoric. In 2024, Gary secured a $15 million REITI 2.0 grant for blight elimination and reinvestment. The city has partnered with the University of Notre Dame School of Architecture to develop a comprehensive downtown revitalization plan featuring a proposed City Renaissance Park and a Great Migration Museum, celebrating Gary's cultural heritage. For the first time in decades, new housing is being constructed. The first new single-family home in the Etna neighborhood in generations was celebrated as a historic moment. Crime rates are declining. Homicides fell from 52 in 2023 to 40 in 2024. the lowest number since 2018. With $12 million in state, private, and federal funding, Gary is systematically demolishing abandoned properties and preparing sites for redevelopment. The Gary Works, while much smaller than its peak, remains the largest integrated steel mill in North America and still employs over 2,200 people. These efforts face enormous challenges. Decades of disinvestment cannot be reversed overnight. The poverty rate remains crushing, the tax base inadequate, and the infrastructure crumbling. But for the first time in generations, there is a sense that Gary might have a future beyond serving as a cautionary tale. The story of Gary, Indiana, reveals the fragility of American prosperity. A city that seemed permanently prosperous, built by some of the most powerful corporations in American history, could be reduced to ruins within a generation. It shows how economic change, demographic shifts, and political decisions can interact in devastating ways. Gary's decline was not inevitable. It was the result of specific policy choices and economic forces that prioritized efficiency over community, profits over people, and suburban growth over urban stability. The elimination of Gary's buffer zone, the shift in state tax policy, and the federal policies that subsidize suburban sprawl all contributed to the city's collapse. But Gary's story also demonstrates human resilience. Despite losing 2/3 of its population, despite facing seemingly insurmountable challenges, the city survives. Current residents like State Representative Reagan Hatcher, daughter of former Mayor Richard Hatcher, continue fighting for their community. "I've never felt unsafe in Gary," she says, challenging outsiders' perceptions of her hometown. Today's Gary contains both the ruins of American industrial might and the seeds of potential renewal. Whether those seeds can grow into sustainable prosperity remains to be seen. But the city that once produced the steel to build America and the music that defined American culture refuses to surrender to the forces that brought it low. Gary's future may look nothing like its past, but its story reminds us that in America, both decline and renewal are always possible. The question is not whether Gary will ever again house 178,000 residents or employ 30,000 steelworkers. The question is whether a community that has survived so much loss can find new ways to thrive. In the end, Gary's greatest lesson may be about the price of putting all your eggs in one basket and the cost of abandoning communities when economic winds shift. The city that U.S. Steel built and then left behind stands as both a warning and a challenge to an America still grappling with the consequences of industrial transformation.